All right, guys. I'm having some glitchiness with the recordings here, but hopefully we're good to go now. Um, you know, Looking at what we've done before, we talked a little bit about the digestive system yesterday. We talked about like mechanical digestion, which is like the chewing and the grinding up of food. We talked about chemical digestion, which is using chemicals like your saliva or your acid to actually break down the molecules that are the food. So today I figured let's talk a little bit about what each organ does in this system called the digestive system. And there's some misconceptions here, I think, especially among seventh graders about what things do what. So let's dive right in and talk about kind of the first thing, which is actually this tube coming down into the stomach. So I have the stomach here, but we got to look right here. There's like a tube that comes down, and that tube coming down from your mouth to your stomach is called your esophagus. Now, I don't really have that on the slideshow here, but it's not, if you feel your neck, you can put your hand up to your neck right now. If you feel it, you can actually feel a round tube. That's your trachea. We talked about that during the respiration video. This is actually behind your trachea. The esophagus is behind it, and you can think of it like a sock. So when it doesn't have something in it, it's actually flat, and it sits between your trachea and your spinal cord. And then when you have food that you're swallowing, it actually kind of opens up, the food goes in it, and then it kind of closes up behind it. So you can imagine like shoving something in the sock, and then if it had a hole on the other end, just shoving it straight through the sock's gonna lay flat again. And that's the esophagus. So the esophagus is not protected by anything, and once food makes it down into the stomach will break apart your food, and it does this a couple ways. Mechanically, by like squeezing it with muscles and grunching it together, and also chemically by producing acid, pumping acid into the stomach to chemically break apart the food. Now, if your body makes too much acid, it can actually like pile up inside of the stomach and then creep its way up into your esophagus, and that's what we call heartburn. So your stomach is protected by a snot layer. We call it a mucus layer. Your stomach, as well as making acid, will produce mucus and coat its inside with this mucus so it doesn't get burned by the acid. Your esophagus does not have that protective coating. So if acid kind of is made too much and it bubbles up inside of your esophagus, you get something called heartburn. And it can be nasty. If you get it commonly enough, the acid can actually burn through your esophagus and create holes. And that's not a good thing, and it's not going to be comfortable either. If you make a whole lot of acid, it can also actually burn through your stomach as well. We call those things ulcers, and they're really painful. But the stomach is your first real, other than your mouth, the first site of digestion, where we're looking at, muscle contractions to stir it up, to squish it up, and also acid to chemically break down food. Now, what you'll notice too is that the stomach is on the left side of the body. It's not in the middle, and it's not down by your belly button or anything. It's actually just like up in your rib cage, underneath your like right chest, and that's where your stomach's located. So from there, food passes to the small intestine, but let's talk about a couple organs before we get there. So right now we've turned the food into kind of like a really, really thick shake, if you will, almost like a big milkshake, okay? But right underneath the stomach, connected to it, is the pancreas. And the pancreas's job is to make enzymes. And enzymes are little chemicals, they're proteins, and these proteins break apart food molecules. So they might be like breaking apart DNA, they might be breaking apart proteins, they might be breaking apart cellulose fibers from plant cell walls, right? So enzymes are pumped into your food shake, okay? And their job is to, again, break your food apart so it's easily digestible. The pancreas makes those. You can't live without it. And it is also key to note that food never goes into the pancreas. The pancreas makes these enzymes and secretes them or puts them into basically where your small intestine starts, okay? I think it's the duodenum is what it's called. Not that you need to know that. So if you notice that the stomach is kind of right here, if you follow my mouse, there's the stomach, and the pancreas sits underneath it here. On top of the stomach and on the right side of your body is the liver. And the liver does a lot of things, but as far as digestion goes, its main job is to produce enzymes that break down fat, and that enzyme is called bile. And it pumps that bile into the same spot that the pancreas pumps in its enzymes. And you can actually store this bile as well in something called a gallbladder. So that's actually underneath the liver. You can like lift it up, and there's a little tiny bag, and that stores bile. It's called the gallbladder. Some people get a gallbladder infection and they may have this removed, and you can survive by removing your gallbladder. Your liver will still make bile. You can still digest fats, although maybe you don't store the bile anymore. You can't survive if you remove the liver. You need your liver. So you can live without the little storage bag though. So both those pump in enzymes into the small intestine right here, right at the start of it. And the small intestine, it's really, really, really long, but it's also very, very, very narrow compared to the large intestine. So you can think of it as a long, tiny tube. And this is the middle part of your tummy, I guess, right in your abdomen, just the middle of it. And it's just a ton of little squigglies. And its job is to digest your food. It's to absorb your food into the blood. So this area is surrounded by tons of blood capillaries, which you know are these tiny blood vessels where diffusion occurs. And food is actively transported from your intestines into the cells and then into your blood right next to it. And then the blood carries that food all around your body. Okay, so this is the spot where stuff is removed from your food and put into your blood so it can be used. So when food comes in, it's like a really thick milkshake, but when it leaves, when it exits the small intestine, most all that food's been absorbed. It's actually like a tea, a watery tea with little floaties in it, if you want to think of it that way. It's very, very watery. And it ends right over here on the right side of your body, down near your, like, maybe where you would have your pants or your belt sit near your hip, right on the kind of the right side by your hip. That's where the small intestine ends, and that's where the food then moves into the large intestine, which travels up the right side of your body to just underneath your rib cage, across just underneath your rib cage, and then down the left side of your body, where it kind of loops around, and then down to your rectum where you poop out the food. Okay. This is called the large intestine simply because it's bigger in diameter. It's like a bigger tube, but it's shorter. It's not as long, not nearly as long as the small intestine. Okay. So its main job is to absorb water. I told you that when food enters the large intestine, it's like tea. Obviously, when it exits, it's like a solid. So water in that tea just gets totally absorbed into your blood, and you reuse it all the time. Okay. A couple interesting facts, actually. Like bearded dragons and a couple other like lizards and turtles, they can actually absorb water through their butt. So they can open up their cloaca and let water go into their large intestine, and then they would absorb water that way. In fact, that's how most like bearded dragons get their water. You could put them in a bath and they absorb it that way. Frogs don't do that. A lot of people think that frogs can sit in water and they absorb it somewhat through their butt. Really, frogs get their water straight through their skin. So it diffuses right into their skin and the blood, and then they can transport it around. So they need to maintain wetness, but turtles and some lizards, especially desert dwelling ones, can just bathe in water, and that's how they drink, which is kind of crazy and cool to think about. Some other weird stuff. Oh yeah, like if you get sick, sometimes your body thinks that you get sick because it was something that you ate, like a toxic thing or nasty spoiled food. And so there's two ways to get rid of food that may be bad that you've eaten. You could throw it up, and that gets the food and the nasty infectious things out of you. Or you could, if the food is too far along, maybe it's easier to push it out the other way fast. And so we get what we call diarrhea, where your body tries to push the food out backwards, through the backside quickly. When that happens, it doesn't get enough time to absorb. Your large intestine doesn't have enough time to absorb water. And so your stool, your feces, your poop comes out very watery, and we call that diarrhea. So if your parents tell you to drink plenty of fluids when you are sick, that's the reason, is because you aren't normally digesting the water that you normally would. You aren't keeping it in your body. You're actually losing it. And because of that, you need to drink extra fluids, more than you probably normally would, because you're not absorbing it like you should. Okay. So a couple weird things going on there. Let's talk a little bit about these two and just how they relate. Some animals like bunnies and cows and goats, they have extremely, extremely big tummies. You can think of like a rhino. And that is basically because they a lot of times will have multiple stomachs, but they also have huge, really, really, really long small intestines. And the reason is because the things that they eat, the veggies, the grass, they're just so hard to digest. It takes a long time for our enzymes to work on those hard to digest foods. And the longer it's in your digestive system, the more nutrients they can get from it. So cows and bunnies and camels and rhinos and elephants have huge tummies, and it's all really just small intestine to get nutrients. However, when you think about carnivores like our frog, I'll scroll down here. A frog's small intestine is relatively short. Here's where it starts in this picture, and it's maybe this long. That's it. A frog is it's a carnivore. It eats meat products, animal products, so it digests things that are very much like it and not hard to digest. Like it's very similar to the frog's body. So the food's really easy to get at the nutrients. It's really easy to digest. It doesn't need a large intestine or a long intestine to get the nutrients out of it. So carnivores have really short digestive tracts. That is, so if like you took a lion and just fed it like bamboo and grass, it would not be able to digest it, and it's just going to die. Okay, it's not capable of eating foods like that. We eat both. We're an omnivore, so our digestive tract, our small intestine, kind of fits in the middle of the two. It's kind of long. It's also kind of short. It's like medium. Okay, and that means that we can eat some vegetables, some plant matter, and we can also eat animal matter as well. But doing just hard to digest vegetables, we can't do. So I'm thinking like grass, sticks, bark off of a tree, things like that. We can't digest it. Our digestive system is not good enough to do that. It's not long enough to get the nutrients out of those things. But however, we can digest some fruits, some veggies that are more easily digestible. So there's a kind of a correlation between how long the small intestine is and what you can and should eat. Okay. If you want some extra practice with these, I do have a Quizlet for you. It's on the human body, and you can go to Quizlet.com to practice pretty much everything that relates to the human body. So we got lung stuff on here. We got liver stuff. We got stomach stuff, digestive things. So feel free to use the link in Classroom, go to Quizlet, and study up on all the terms for the human body, guys. Okay. Enjoy your Friday. We're kind of done with the human body, and we'll take a test soon, so it would be good to kind of study these terms, and it would also be good to go through your notes. But have a good weekend, and we'll kind of come back and talk about ecology for the last part of the year here. Have a good weekend.